I used to believe that if I pushed hard enough, they'd stop seeing me as just the youngest person in the room, or the only daughter, and finally recognize me as someone capable of carrying the Lancaster legacy forward. I'm Eva Lancaster. If the name sounds familiar, it's probably because of Lancaster and Sons, the luxury home design powerhouse that once reigned over the East Coast. But here's what most people don't know. The Sons part, that wasn't just branding, it was a boundary, a quiet declaration that this empire belonged to the men. I grew up on dusty construction sites and inside perfectly staged show homes, always a few steps behind my father and two older brothers. They got to hold the blueprints and call the shots. I carried clipboards and fetched coffee. Whenever I spoke up with ideas, I got polite nods and condescending grins. I was labeled driven, the kind of word you'd use for a kitten trying to chase a lion. Still, I kept quiet. I took every internship, stayed late for every shift, handled every dirty job they'd hand me. I memorized contracts, tracked financials better than our CFO, and learned the market inside and out. By 23, I had an MBA, something no one else in the family could claim. At 24, I was managing full-scale projects across regions. But none of that mattered, not when the people around you have already decided you don't belong. The first time I raised the topic of succession planning in a board meeting, just a gentle nudge toward preparing for future leadership, my father shut me down before I could finish the sentence. "You're not one of us, Eva," he said, his voice cutting through the room like glass. The room went still. I stared at him. "What did you just say?" He didn't even glance up from his notes. "This company was built by men. It's led by men. You're smart, sure, but this isn't your world. You don't have the instinct." My oldest brother laughed softly from across the table. My mother kept her eyes on her lap. Not one person defended me, not even my uncle, who used to say in private that I'd be the best thing to happen to this company. "You're too emotional," my father went on, as though he were offering advice. "You care too much about people's feelings and not enough about business. That's not leadership, it's sentiment." I swallowed the lump in my throat. That meeting was supposed to be my launch. I had poured weeks into my proposal. A full 5-year forecast, market research, and a detailed plan to expand into 3 untapped regions. But all they saw was a little girl pretending to play boss. Later that night, I was alone in the office I technically ran, despite not having the title, when my father walked in unannounced. "You know," he said, like we were chatting about the weather, "your brothers may not be perfect, but they know how to represent the Lancaster brand. You've always been the dreamer." I let out a dry laugh. "You mean I have vision?" He narrowed his eyes. "No, I mean you confuse having ideas with having influence. You've always been pathetic. Never the sharpest. You just worked harder to make up for it." That line stuck to me like a stain. Pathetic. Never the smart one. He left without saying another word. I sat there, staring at the reflection of myself in my laptop's black screen. The room was dim, cold. But for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt clear. If they wouldn't give me a seat at the table, I'd build my own. Bigger. Better. Unshakable. I wasn't going to beg for a place that was never meant for me. I'd walk away, and I'd create something so undeniable they'd be forced to remember what they lost. They didn't realize it that night, but that would be the last time they ever looked down on me. They had dismissed me. But I had already started writing my own chapter. You'd think I would have left quietly after all that. Maybe I should have. But deep down, I still had that flicker of hope that if I proved myself again with something they couldn't ignore, maybe they'd finally see me. So I did what any pathetic girl who wasn't the smart one would do. I got back to work. I spent weeks polishing a business plan that could transform Lancaster and Sons. I dug deep into data on consumer shifts, environmental trends, and tech integration. I found our gap, luxury eco-smart homes. No one on the East Coast was leading in that space, but we could. We should. I created a campaign, branding, financial models, customer personas, even prototypes. I reached out to my MBA contacts for expert feedback. Then I booked a small conference room in HQ and invited the executive team. I remember my hands trembling as I clicked through the presentation. I remember how no one would meet my eyes. And I especially remember my father's expression when I finished. Not impressed, not amused. Just that same smug, closed-lipped smirk he always wore when someone didn't know their place. When I ended, silence. My brothers lounged in their chairs like they were waiting for dessert. My uncle looked bored. My father was the only one to speak. "You done?" he asked. I nodded. He sighed and turned to Clark, my oldest brother. "Clark, want to explain to your sister why that plan would tank our bottom line in a year?" Clark chuckled. "Eva, come on. This isn't a classroom. You can't just toss around buzzwords like green and smart tech and expect real investors to bite. What do you think this is? Tesla for houses?" Quiet laughter echoed across the room. "But this is real," I said, voice trembling but steady. "The data." "Data doesn't matter," my father interrupted. "Instinct does. And mine says this is a vanity project. You want to pretend to be a CEO. Fine, but not here. This is a real business, not your playground." "Dad." "No, look," he said, rising to his feet. "If you really want to build something, go do it somewhere else. Start your own company. Let's see how far you get. Don't walk in here pretending you belong, because you don't. You never did." That word again, outsider. I scanned the room, hoping someone, anyone, would step in. But all I saw were smug smiles, awkward glances, and a silence that said more than words. My mother didn't even bother showing up. She hardly attended these meetings anymore. Quietly, I began gathering my notes and files. As I reached for the door, Ryan, my younger brother, leaned back with that irritating smirk of his. "If this flops," he said, grinning, "there's an opening at some design firm. You'd be great at picking out throw pillows." More laughter followed. And right then, I knew I didn't belong here. Not anymore. Maybe I never did. I wasn't their sister, their daughter, or even a colleague. Just a name they let hang around out of habit, nothing more. I didn't cry. Not there. But when I got home, it hit me like a tidal wave. The embarrassment. The fury. The ache of being pushed out by the people who were supposed to know me best. Years of being silenced, brushed off, and underestimated. Of being told I should be thankful for scraps. I wanted to scream, tear it all down. But I didn't. I packed a bag instead. The next morning, I slipped out without telling a soul. I left behind the expectations, the legacy, the idea that I was meant to stay small just to make them comfortable. I walked away from a seat at a table that was never truly mine, and stepped into a future wide open and uncertain. I landed in a new city, one where nobody knew my surname. Here, I wasn't Ava Lancaster, the family embarrassment. I was just Ava, a woman with a dream, a purpose, and nothing tying her down. In a tiny apartment above a bakery that always smelled like cinnamon rolls and warm bread, I opened my laptop. No fancy title, no smug brothers, no boardroom whispers. Just me, and a fresh start. Being overlooked has its advantages. It makes you invisible, and when people don't see you coming, they never see the impact you'll make. In that modest little place, with peeling paint and a rattling heater, I started something real. Not with their wealth, but with focus. I stopped chasing their approval, stopped waiting to be noticed. I named the company Aller Designs, after a faint star, barely seen from Earth, always burning quietly in the background. Subtle, unassuming, but brilliant in its own right. The early days were tough. I lived off savings, ate more instant noodles than I cared to admit, and worked long into the night. I pitched to anyone who would listen. Contractors, small developers, homeowners with big dreams. Most shut the door on me, but a few cracked it open. And I poured everything into those early projects, treating each one like it was my ticket to something bigger. I carved out a space, luxury, eco-conscious renovations for clients who wanted smart, meaningful design. It was a niche, but it was mine. We kept things low profile, intentionally. My family had no idea I was even still in the game. What they didn't realize, what they couldn't realize, was that this wasn't just a passion project. It was a rival. I watched Lancaster and Sons from a distance. They were still getting press, still clinging to tired ideas, still ignoring the shift in what people wanted. They were stuck in the past, so I made moves. I brought in a marketing pro from a leading competitor. We built a brand tailored for the clients my father never took seriously: young professionals, women-led households, modern families who wanted innovation and warmth. Our aesthetic was sleek, efficient, and conscious, everything they weren't. And I wasn't finished. We started bidding, discreetly, on mid-tier commercial contracts. Some of the same ones my father's firm had won without lifting a finger. Now, they were losing them. To us, a no-name team with vision, agility, and grit. They didn't know who was behind the new name. And I liked it that way. I started recruiting some of their best people, the ones they ignored, overlooked, or took for granted. Designers, coordinators, assistants, people with stories like mine. People who wanted to matter. They found a home with me, and our designs grew brighter, stronger, while Lancaster and Sons stayed stuck. About a year and a half in, I found myself in a meeting with a big-name client. They were choosing between us and Lancaster. I'd seen the other pitch, same old formula. Then they looked at ours. This, they said, eyes scanning our design board, feels like the future. Who are you? I smiled. Just someone with something to prove. We got the contract. By the end of that quarter, we had won 3 more against them. Their reputation wasn't enough anymore, and I was just getting warmed up. Still, I kept my silence. Let them laugh. Let them dismiss us. Let them keep wondering why their deals kept falling through. Let them believe we were just another firm. While I built the empire they never saw coming. I had become a ghost in their world, gone, irrelevant, easily forgotten. By the time they recognized who they were truly up against, it would already be too late. They say pride comes before the fall, but in my father's case, it was pride that built the fall, brick by smud brick. On the surface, Lancaster and Sons still looked like the epitome of success. Gleaming glass buildings, shiny trucks emblazoned with their name, full-page ads, and magazine spreads. But beneath that polished exterior, I could see the rot starting to spread. It began with a canceled deal, a resort project in Maine they had been counting on. The client pulled out, citing creative differences, but I knew the truth. We had presented a cleaner, better idea at a fraction of the cost. Next, the layoffs began. It started with a few junior designers, then the longtime receptionist, followed by a project lead I'd worked with for years. A man who had bled Lancaster blue. When he reached out, asking for a job, I didn't rub it in. I just sent him a contract. Welcome to Aura. Then came the real blow. Lancaster and Sons lost a high-profile government contract for eco-friendly retrofits. A massive multi-year deal they had assumed was theirs. They didn't even put up a fight, thinking their name would carry them. But times had changed. Buyers wanted innovation, sustainability, and flexibility. Everything we had to offer. Watching them stumble through a press release blaming market volatility and increased competition was almost laughable. They didn't name us, but they were starting to feel the pressure. Their once impressive social media presence began imitating our branding, copying our hashtags, even launching an eco-initiative that felt like an afterthought. They were chasing shadows, and they were losing. Whispers about mismanagement, internal strife, and poor cash flow began to circulate. I didn't fuel the rumors. I didn't need to. I let them spread on their own. Truth has a way of slipping out when people are scared, and my family was starting to panic. One afternoon, I walked into a trade expo. I wasn't there as a speaker or exhibitor, just as an observer, curious to see how Lancaster and Sons would show up now that they weren't the biggest name in the room. Their booth was tucked in the back, smaller than usual, with fewer visitors. My father wasn't there, but Clark and Ryan were, their forced smiles barely hiding their discomfort. I stayed out of sight, just close enough to watch. A developer I had met weeks earlier approached their booth. "Sorry, I'm already working with Aura," he said casually when Clark handed him a brochure. "They're doing some really impressive work." Clark's smile dropped instantly. "Aura?" The man nodded. "You should check them out. They're doing something special." He walked away, leaving Clark and Ryan in stunned silence. Clark turned to Ryan. "Who the hell is Aura?" I smiled to myself. The moment of reckoning had arrived. But the real turning point came on a rainy Thursday morning. I was in my office, reviewing plans for expansion when my assistant rushed in, her face pale. "Ava," she said, holding out her phone. "You need to see this." She showed me an article with the headline, "Lancaster and Sons hit with major lawsuit over delayed projects and breach of contract." It wasn't just a critique, it was an expose. The article detailed missed deadlines, budget issues, poor planning, and internal conflicts, complete with anonymous sources from within the company, likely former employees who had quietly joined Aura. Lancaster and Sons was unraveling, and the world had just gotten a whiff of it. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply closed the article, leaned back in my chair, and took a breath. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. It was about showing them, and everyone, that I wasn't the naive girl they had once dismissed. I wasn't playing pretend in their world. I was building something real, and while they laughed at me, I was creating a future without them. But what none of them anticipated was that my future was about to be broadcasted to the world, and they were going to know exactly who I was. There are moments in life that split everything into two parts, before and after. For me, that moment came on a quiet Monday morning, sipping black coffee while my phone buzzed. I almost didn't answer. I was in the middle of reviewing design mock-ups for a luxury green development outside Seattle when my assistant burst in, looking stunned. "Ava," she gasped, holding up her phone. "You're trending." I blinked, confused. "What?" She turned the screen toward me, and there it was. Ava Lancaster, youngest female CEO in the country, founder of Allure Designs. My heart stopped. It wasn't just a business article, it was everywhere. CNN, Forbes, Business Insider, even the morning news had picked it up. One headline stood out: "The Ghost Founder. Ara CEO revealed as heir to Lancaster and Sons, the company she quietly outmaneuvered." I didn't need to read the article. I already knew the story they were telling. The girl exiled from her family's business, ridiculed for her ambition, only to return with an empire of her own. The article included quotes from former colleagues, clips from my keynote speech at a tech conference, photos of me in front of Ara's sleek, minimalist headquarters. Everything Lancaster and Sons wasn't. And then came the final touch, a side-by-side comparison of their losses versus our recent victories. It was blatant. The media had drawn battle lines. My phone began ringing. Emails flooded in. Journalists, investors, even congratulations from people I hadn't spoken to in years. But the message that hit me hardest wasn't from any of them. It was from my mother. One sentence: "Your father saw the news. He hasn't spoken in an hour." I stared at the screen, not out of guilt, not even satisfaction, just silence. For years, he had insisted I didn't belong. For years, I thought that proving him wrong would heal something inside me. But in that moment, watching the world celebrate what he had tried so hard to suppress, I realized it didn't matter anymore. I had an epiphany that afternoon. I no longer needed their approval. Later that day, my publicist called to confirm a major request. A national TV interview, primetime slot. "Are you interested?" she asked. I thought it over. I hadn't created Lara for fame or recognition. I built it for freedom, for something bigger than myself. But perhaps now was the time to step into the spotlight. "Let's do it," I said. The interview aired 3 days later. I chose a deep navy suit. Elegant, understated. No flashy logos. No revenge speeches. Just my presence, speaking volumes. The host started with my rise from mystery to industry leader, talking about Lara's quiet ascent, revolutionizing eco-luxury real estate in just a few short years. Then came the inevitable question: "Is it true that you're Charles Lancaster's daughter?" I offered a calm smile. "Yes." "Why keep it a secret?" "I didn't keep it a secret," I replied. "I just stopped apologizing for not being welcomed." The host blinked in surprise. "And now, you've built a company that outperformed theirs." "It's not about outperforming them," I said, even though we both knew it was. "It's about creating something true to who I am and offering others the space to do the same." But amidst the celebrations, there was one place that remained eerily quiet: the Lancaster family group chat. No comments, no snide emojis, just silence. Then finally, a message from Clark. "You used us." I didn't respond, not then. What was there to say? They had spent years pretending I didn't exist, thriving on my absence. And now the world knew the truth. That announcement didn't just give me power, it made them face something they'd spent years ignoring. Me, Eva Lancaster. The one they'd written off. The one they said would never lead. The one they thought would never succeed. And now, I was the youngest female CEO of the country. But there was still one last step left. One final chapter. And it would begin at the family reunion. The invitation arrived with no hint of change. A crisp ivory envelope with elegant embossed writing. Lancaster Family Annual Reunion Saturday at 4 p.m. hosted at the estate. No personal note. No apology. Just tradition. I stared at it for a while, letting the irony sink in. 4 years ago, they had laughed at me, told me I didn't belong, called me pathetic. Now, they were inviting me back into the house I once called home. The house that had made it clear I was never more than a guest. I hadn't been back since the day I left. But this time, I accepted. Not for them, for me. That Saturday, I drove up to the estate in a sleek black Rolls-Royce. The Ghost. The name made me smile. Fitting for the girl they had once erased. The guard recognized me instantly, his eyes widening as he lifted the barrier. The driveway was filled with luxury cars, BMWs, Audis, a few classic Bentleys. But mine was the only Rolls. I stepped out, wearing a tailored ivory suit. No logos, no dramatic gestures. Just quiet elegance and a presence that made people pause without raising my voice. As I approached the entrance, murmurs started. Heads turned. Conversations hushed. They saw me. Finally, they saw me, but no one knew what to say. I walked in, owning the space because I belonged there, whether they liked it or not. My mother was the first to approach, her eyes softening. For a split second, I thought I saw regret. "You look amazing," she whispered. "Thanks," I replied. "But let's not pretend." She gave me a sad, small smile. Fair enough. Inside, the party continued, cousins, uncles, family friends. When my brothers spotted me, they froze by the fireplace. Clark's jaw tightened. Ryan's eyes flicked from my wrist to the car keys in my hand. I didn't stop to talk to them. I headed straight for the back patio, where my father stood alone, looking out over the lawn like a king surveying a crumbling empire. He turned when he heard my heels. For the first time, Charles Lancaster looked small. We stood in silence for a moment. "You came," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "I did." He studied me. "You've made quite a name for yourself." I didn't respond. He looked away, his voice strained. "Eva, I may have been wrong." That almost made me laugh. May have been. But I didn't come for apologies. I came for closure. He turned back to me. "The company, it's struggling. Your brothers." He stopped himself. "We could use your help." I met his gaze. Calm, steady, no anger anymore. Just clarity. "You told me I wasn't the smart one," I said quietly. "Just a pathetic girl with ideas and no power." He didn't deny it. "Now," I said, gesturing vaguely toward the house, the party, the crumbling empire, "you want my help." His lips parted, but I interrupted. "I'm not here to rescue you, Dad. I built something without you. While you were mocking me, I was creating. While you were dismissing me, I became everything you said I couldn't be." He stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Good. I turned to leave, but before I did, I glanced over my shoulder. "You were right about one thing," I said. "I'm not like you, and thank God for that." As I walked through the house, people parted from me. Whispers, stolen glances, a few forced smiles. But I didn't need their approval. I wasn't there to prove anything anymore. I had already won. Outside, my Rolls-Royce gleamed in the late afternoon sun. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and glanced back one last time. Not at the house, but at the girl I used to be, the one who tried so hard to be seen. And I smiled. Because she wasn't trying anymore. She was leading. And from that day on, the world would never forget her name. Eva Lancaster. Not the black sheep. Not the afterthought. Not the pathetic girl. Just the woman who rewrote the rules and made sure no one like her would ever be forgotten again. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Stay amazed.